Hello, world and universe. Welcome to the Trevor Donald Experience. Manifest your truth. And if you're new to the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button. And for all my continued followers, I want to say thank you. And this is an opinion-based video channel where I try to open your eyes and ears up to some of the travails and tribulations that take place throughout our cities, our states, our country, and sometimes around the world. Well, this one I got for you is coming straight out of the state of Minnesota. And this is a very interesting case that I want you all to pay close attention to, that has to deal with three nonprofit organizations that are state and federally funded in Minnesota. And they're talking about there is massive fraud in Minnesota, detailing nearly $1 billion in schemes. The federal government is looking into whether Minnesota fraudsters have funded a terrorist group out of Somalia. So the federal government is looking into whether Minnesota fraudsters have funded a terrorist group out of Somalia. And in the brief part of it, here are the three nonprofit organizations that a lot of this money has allegedly been funneled to, that has gotten this up to $1 billion worth of fraud schemes. So the brief part is the $300 million from Feeding Our Future. So pay attention to the names of these nonprofits. $300 million from Feeding Our Future. The possibility of nearly $220 million in the autism program fraud, and the $302 million from the housing stabilization program. All of this adds up to $822 million in fraud from Minnesota services. So, while fraud in Minnesota has been covered for years by Fox News, it has been gaining national attention recently. Taking a closer look at why the focus has shifted to Minnesota, we have to take a closer look at what was the catalyst for President Donald Trump and the national media to start talking about the massive cases of fraud that Fox News 9 has been detailing over the past 4 years. The story of fraud in Minnesota gained national attention after an article was published citing anonymous sources claiming money from these fraud cases was being funneled to the terrorist organization called Al-Shabaab. Al-Shabaab is the militant wing of the Somali Council of Islamic Courts that took over most of southern Somalia in 2006. As of this publishing, no one has been able to provide evidence that any money from these fraud cases in Minnesota have gone to fund terrorism in Somalia. Representative Ilhan Omar, a Democrat from Minnesota, told one reporter, if there is a linkage in the money that they have stolen going to terrorism, then that is a failure of the FBI and our court system in not figuring that out. Representative Ms. Omar added that she is pretty confident that any link to Minnesota fraud dollars and terrorism is a false claim. In response to the Al-Shabaab story, President Donald Trump said he was going to revoke temporary asylum protections for Somali refugees and order ICE raids in Minneapolis. So President Trump wants to send ICE individuals to Minnesota and continue these ICE raids and removing these immigrants, whether legal or illegal. In a social media post, Trump threatened to send Somalis back to where they came from, alleging Minnesota is a hub of fraudulent money laundering activity. This is what President Trump is saying. Not saying I agree with it, but this is what he's saying publicly. The Treasury Department is also now investigating this claim. Here are the details regarding the three major fraud cases in Minnesota. Acting U.S. Attorney Joseph Thompson said recently that when his current investigations are finished, fraud in programs administered by Minnesota could exceed $1 billion. So let's get into these three programs. First of all, Feeding Our Future. 78 defendants have been charged in the Feeding Our Future fraud case. The 78th defendant was recently charged on November 24th. There have been 56 convictions so far in the Feeding Our Future scheme, including the ringleader of the organization, Ami Bach. Bach was found guilty by a jury of fraudulently creating and operating federal child nutrition program sites throughout the state of Minnesota. So this is a child nonprofit organization, a federal child nutrition program. These sites claim to be serving meals to thousands of children a day within just days or weeks of being formed. An audit showed these sites were serving a small number of meals, and some weren't serving meals at all. Here are a list. There are at least 47 people that have been charged in this fraud as of September 2022. So how much fraud was it? In Feeding Our Future, Feeding Our Future is the largest COVID-19 fraud scheme in the country at nearly $300 million. The government has recovered approximately $75 million. That's in the Feeding Our Future. Here's the second one, autism providers. There's a lot of speculation on vaccines and autism and that relationship, even with Robert F. Kennedy Jr. and dealing with the CDC, Health and Human Services, HHS. So here's another one, a nonprofit called Autism Providers. After the Feeding Our Future scandal, fraud was discovered in another program in Minnesota. In this particular situation, auditors found a massive growth in spending in Minnesota's autism program. The number of providers who are supposed to diagnose and treat people with autism spectrum syndrome increased 700% in the past 5 years, climbing from 41 providers in 2018 to 328 providers in 2024. So it's like mice going after cheese. Once these providers, they had very few of them, 41 in 2018, and once these providers and these nonprofits saw that they could get access to millions and millions of dollars, that number of providers from 41 jumped to 328. The amount paid to providers during that time increased 3,000%, from about $6 million to nearly $192 million. This is according to data provided to the Minnesota Reformer by the Department of Human Services. In September, the Department of Justice charged their first person in this fraud case. Asha Farhan Hassan, 28 years old, was charged with wire fraud in her role in a $14 million autism fraud scheme. Hassan and her partners approached parents in the Somali community to recruit their children into smart therapy. Hassan was also charged with participating in the Feeding Our Future fraud scheme, for which she received $465,000. So how much fraud? State payments for autism claims exploded from $1 million in 2017 to more than $220 million in 2024. In just a 7-year period. According to the DOJ, much of that increase is now believed to be linked to fraudulent activity. Here's the third nonprofit, housing stabilization fraud. The most recent fraud case to be uncovered came this year in the state's housing stabilization program. The program launched in 2020, which helped vulnerable individuals find and maintain housing. However, it was discovered many providers were charging the government for services that were never provided to the people. How many times have we heard that? 8 defendants have been federally charged with wire fraud for their roles in a massive housing stabilization fraud scheme. This program, under the umbrella of the Minnesota Department of Human Services, which was originally projected to cost about $2.6 million per year, by 2024, it spiked to $104 million in annual payments. DHS banned 115 individual businesses from billing Medicaid due to what the state labels as credible allegations of fraud. So we're talking about housing vouchers, Medicaid, food stamps, all under that social service umbrella. Then in October 31st, the Minnesota Department of Human Services announced it was terminating the program due to widespread fraud. So let's look at this timeline. In July 2020, Minnesota becomes the first state in the country to offer Medicaid coverage for housing stabilization services. In 2021, programs paid out more than $21 million in claims for 8,300 enrolled people. In 2022, program pays out more than $42 million in claims for 14,200 enrolled people. 2023, program pays out more than $74 million in claims for 16,900 enrolled people. In 2024, program pays out more than $104 million in claims for 21,300 enrolled people. So look, each year the number of enrollees increases, the number of payouts increases. First 6 months of 2025, program pays out more than $61 million in claims to over 21,000 enrolled people. According to the DOJ, Minnesota Housing Stabilization Program paid out $302 million over 4.5 years. The estimated cost of the program over that same time frame was actually budgeted to be around $12 million. At the time of these charges, acting U.S. Attorney Joseph H. Thompson said most of the $300 million in spending was fraudulent. So the total fraud in Minnesota from these three programs, what are they all saying? In all, the $300 million from Feeding Our Future fraud case, the possibility of nearly $220 million in autism program fraud, and the $302 million from the housing stabilization programs adds up to $822 million in fraud from Minnesota services. These totals all come from the Justice Department. And remember, all of this is taking place under the watchful eye of Governor Tim Walz, who was the Democratic running mate for this past presidential election with ex-Vice President Kamala Harris. And of course, we know that Governor Tim Walz got caught in all kinds of lies about his military background and all kinds of things. And this is the guy that the Minnesota citizens decided to vote in as their premier leader of their state. He is the governor of Minnesota, so he has total governance over the state. And look at where his watchful eye, which is not watching, where $1 billion is going out of the door as fast as it came in due to all of this alleged fraud. President Donald Trump commented on Governor Tim Walz and immigrants from Somalia during his cabinet meeting on Tuesday afternoon, saying they contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country. I'll be honest with you. He's talking about immigrants from Somalia. He says Somalians ripped off that state for billions of dollars and they contribute nothing. The welfare is like 88%. They contribute nothing. I don't want them in our country, and I'll be honest with you. I don't want them in this country. Their country is no good for a reason. And these are all President Donald Trump's quotes, not